welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on the recent content, and it definitely does not go unnoticed. We hope everybody had a great New Year, all that stuff. Had a good holiday. And the day after this episode comes out, January 6th, I know it's wild, is our anniversary of the podcast being created. So we're forever thankful for all the support we amassed over the year. So this is 1 year under our belt. We think we're in a good spot for having 1 year done, and our goal is to continue to grow. Get better every single day, every single episode. We hope you share your feedback on our content, and we want to continue to engage with every single one of our community members. And before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more short form content and updates. And the Discord is coming soon as well, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, so I guess, we'll initially kind of kick it off.
Yeah.
I guess kind of checking in on, how that Knicks Raptors trade has been going on so far. So, obviously, if you remember, I guess, about a week ago or so at this point,
Yeah.
you had the trade between the Knicks and the Raptors, two teams, which we had talked about in the past, one of which in the Raptors was kind of struggling, obviously not very good, whereas the Knicks were doing fine, right? But, it felt like they probably needed some type of change. They were also in the process of suing each other at one point, interestingly enough. But
Yeah.
regardless,
That's great.
we have the trade: OG Anunoby, Malachi Flynn, Precious Achiuwa to the Knicks for RJ Barrett, Emmanuel quickly in a second. And since the trade, right, both of those teams, have played 2 games, and I believe they have won both of those games, right? With the Knicks, they played Minnesota, and I believe they played Chicago as well, right? And in both games, um, you look at the stats for, say, OG Anunoby. In these 2 games for the Knicks, he's averaged 15, 7 rebounds, a little under 2 assists, 2 steals, 40 from 3, 57 from the field. So, those are pretty solid numbers. Obviously, RJ Barrett and Quickly together, right, make up, compromise or make up more of your offense, right? But then you
Sure.
also have to factor on Anunoby, what he can do defensively. He's a better fit, right? He can play off the ball, right? Especially in that Minnesota game, right? He was taking advantage of, cutting off the ball, right? There were some possessions where the Knicks couldn't really get, some great offensive shots, right? But he ended up cutting the basket and got some free dunks. Um, and he can guard, multiple positions, right? There were stretches in that game, right, where he was guarding Anthony Edwards and doing a good job, and then there were other stretches where he was guarding Karl Anthony Towns and
Right.
doing a decent job. So, you can see why the Knicks wanted him, in that deal. The other guys didn't really do much, right? Flynn hasn't really played. Achua hasn't really done much. But obviously the main part of the piece was Anunoby. And I guess if you're the Knicks again, Barrett and Quickly, that's a decent amount, to give up, because those are two, one of which is a starter, the other is your sixth man. But then you have to factor in, right? Barrett's an expensive guy. Not that OG isn't going to be. We'll see how much he gets paid. And then Quickly, they haven't paid yet, and they will have to, because he's in his 4th season. So, 2 guys that are going to be making a lot of money for one guy who's going to be making, less than both of them combined, and is also a better player. I think if you're the Knicks, you'll probably take that. Obviously there's still going to be more work to be done if the Knicks want to move up into that next tier of teams. But, I think either way it makes them a better team, just because I think he's a better team player. You could say RJ Barrett may be the better individual talent. But I think, if in terms of which guy you'd prefer to have on your team, if you're the Knicks, it would be OG Anunoby. I just think he fits in to that culture.
Agreed. Yeah.
And then from the Raptors' perspective, right, you look at what they've done, right? Quickly has now become the starting point guard for the Raptors, and he's played pretty well, right? 20 points a game, 4 assists, a steal, 42 from the field, but 54 from 3. Obviously, very small sample size for both of these, teams, because it's only a couple of games. You look at RJ Barrett, right, returning to, Canada, right, his home country, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
16 and a half points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, 46 from the field, 43 from 3. So the shooting has been pretty good. Again, small sample size. So far, I think if you're both teams, you got to be relatively pleased, because for the Raptors, right, from their perspective, you got back 2 younger players. Not that Anunoby is old by any means, right? I mean,
Right.
he's 26, I think.
Yeah.
So it's not, so it's not like he's an old guy, but you got back 2 younger players, right? That are under long-term deals, or at least Barrett is, and quickly I'm sure they will pay, right? Whereas Anunoby's a free agent, right? We already talked about this, right? With the Raptors, your guys that are going to be gone, they're probably not coming back, or at the very least, we kind of expected that Anunoby wasn't going to be back. So you got to you got to get something out of that, right? You have to move him and see if you can get something back for him as opposed to just letting him walk. So I think they got a good return. So, again, at the time we said that it was a win-win for both teams. Just because, again, if you're the Knicks, you got back a guy that fits into the culture you want and is probably a little bit more of a winning player.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the Raptors, right, you got back two solid young players that you could either build around or, later on you can move them, whatever. So you just have more talent to work with. And so far, it seems like both teams have been better off for the deal. But we'll continue to see where it goes. But, what did you see, from those two, squads, I guess, in terms of their new looks?
Yeah, I mean, I think you spoke about it beautifully, but um, for me, I think, we always knew the problem with the Knicks was there was some sense of awkwardness on the court between, Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson, and RJ Barrett. So now, taking one of those guys out of the equation, and I think probably the worst of the three, not to say he's, bad by any means, but of those three players, I think he probably was the worst career-wise at the time. Bringing in a guy who's, can impact the game in more ways than one with less touches than RJ Barrett, a smoother fit in terms of game. I think even some would say probably more versatile as well, because I think he has the outside shot down for sure. He's also got the defense, and he can get to the basket and shoot mid ranges. So, perfect. I'm not going to say perfect player, but, a more complete package, I think, than RJ Barrett. And, that's not to discredit him at all, because I think he's worked out beautifully in Toronto so far, because I think that's something these teams basically kind of plugged holes that they needed to plug pretty quickly. And I'm surprised that actually went down so early. I thought it was going to be more of a deadline kind of thing if OG was going to get moved at all. But, they're plugging stuff because, like you said, quickly he's come in. He's been the starting PG. I like the aggressiveness. I think that was something they kind of lacked. Because I think with Schroeder, it's like he can be aggressive, but it's the bad kind of aggressive, where it's like, you can either get like a highlight or a low light with him. But I think with Quickly, you're more likely to probably get, a positive bucket with him out there. So that's always good. Then you add in RJ. Exactly. Then you add in RJ Barrett, who's also known to be a scorer. So I think, adding two scorers alongside Siakam and Scotty Barnes, I think that's, a recipe for some potential success, not playoff aspirations or anything like that, but at least you'll be better than what you probably were going to be with Anunoby, which was more of a system player. Like you said, I think, he fits the formula for winning basketball, and clearly that's what the Knicks are trying to do. I don't think they're, aiming for a championship right now, but I think they're aiming for something a little further than the second round, maybe. That's kind of what I look at the Knicks as. But overall, I think it's still a win-win to me, and I know it's very early. Down the line, it could be a complete lose-lose. Who knows? But right now, it's definitely a win-win. I think all players who have been involved in this, who have gotten the playing time, have played well. So you can't really hate on it at all. And, I really hope that, both these teams actually do something. I doubt Toronto will, but I think the Knicks might be poised for a little bit of a playoff run. We'll see, though.
I mean, yeah, I mean, again, when you look at it, just like you said, it kind of adds a little bit more balance and
Yeah.
kind of plucked up some issues with both teams, right? With the Knicks in Anunoby, you get a better 3-point shooter. Especially, again, we already know right from the corners that he's well over 40%
Yeah.
from the corner. RJ Barrett this season's been shooting like 33, 34%.
Exactly.
Not good enough.
Yep.
He prefers to go to the basket, but he's still not like a super efficient guy.
Right.
And he had a pretty good start to the season. I thought he had like some type of migraine or some other type of, injury or something that, kind of kept him out and
Yeah. He
kind of
was
held him back.
sidelined.
Yeah, he had a pretty good start to the year, but again, it just and then with the quickly formula, right, for the Raptors, you get a starting point guard who can shoot,
Mm-hmm.
while still being, like you said, an aggressive type of scorer, that can fit in alongside Barnes,
Yeah.
and Siakam, assuming Siakam still stays. I guess the question is that after these moves, what's the next move for these two teams, right? Because I guess, if you're the Raptors, you're probably thinking, all right, let's see if we can get something back for Pascal Siakam, right?
Sure.
Obviously we've heard a lot about, his name being tied into, a number of different teams, right? He's a good player, that can help, a number of winning teams. Obviously the 3-point shooting is kind of a concern, right? His 3-point shooting at one point earlier in his career was a lot better, right? I think, if you go back to his 2020 season, right? That was the season right after they won the title, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that was one of his second best season. He shot like 36 from three. Um, and the title year he shot 37% from three. Um, and and it's kind of funny because he took twice as many attempts, the year after, right? Because Kawhi was gone, they needed somebody who kind of fill the void. But since
Right.
then, 29%, 34%, 32%, and this year 28, 29%. That's just that's not really like a great sign in terms of like offensively you need a little bit more from the perimeter.
Yeah.
Obviously, if he's on another team, because the Raptors were also just not a very good 3-point shooting team as a whole, so
Hmm.
you could probably fit better on a team with better, shooting, in terms of like as a whole.
Hmm.
But either way, I am kind of curious to see what the Raptors do, right? Because for a stretch, right, a lot of people were kind of saying we don't know what Toronto's going to do, right? Everybody, who covers the league was kind of saying like Toronto has a reputation of kind of like dangling players around, but they don't really do anything with them, right? Van Vliet, we kind of heard about rumors, but he ended up not going anywhere and he just left in free agency. So, they ended up moving on in Obi. So I guess, we'll start with the Raptors. Do you think that Pascal Siakam gets moved? And, if so, what type of teams do you think, would be the best? Because I know there have been teams like Sacramento, I think Dallas, Indiana, along with a couple of other teams as well. But, what do you think is probably like one of the best teams for him? In addition to, like I said, do you think he gets moved at all?
Yeah. Well, I think, based on their early aggressiveness and, doing this um, so much earlier than the deadline, I think, that's a sign that they're probably looking to continue to be aggressive. So I would say Siakam is probably going to get moved by the deadline, and I'd probably buy in on maybe some sort of Warriors thing. I for some reason I feel like that could be a possibility. I know that might not work money wise, but I've also heard some intriguing things, like theory crafting, like you said, with Dallas. I don't know if that would work as well. That would be weird.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that would be like his number one destination. I don't think that should be. I think the Warriors would be an intriguing fit because I think if you couple like Wiggins with something else, I don't know, maybe that would be something that Toronto buys in on. Although, Wiggins' play has been really bad sometimes, and sometimes he looks okay. But, I just think they're probably looking to move on from Pascal Siakam and just kind of kickstart this rebuild, because I think they've already done it by quite literally getting RJ Barrett in quickly. I think that's an interesting haul. It's not like, the most, I guess, like star-studded one, or I guess the one that a lot of people expected, but I think it's an intriguing one because it has a lot of potential and upside, because you can move those guys probably later down the line as well if you don't really, feel like they're a part of your future. So that's probably what I would say is Golden State.
Yeah, I do think, I think he's much more likely to be moved than like a market. And I don't really
Yeah.
understand why Utah would necessarily do that, just because again, it's nice to have some level of talent, like during a rebuild. So I don't really think that makes a lot of sense. But with
Yeah.
Siakam, it's different just because like, he's been there for a while, unlike a market. And I think like it just feels like he's probably prime to go somewhere else. I think the Warriors are a good spot. It just again it's just a matter of what do you actually end up giving up, and then are there other teams that can maybe
Yeah.
provide more. We'll see, because again, Kings have been a rumor, they've been mentioned,
That's a good
but
one,
then
I
it's
think.
like who do they give up, right? Because
Right.
like if you're not going to give up Keegan Murray, who else can you really put into that package, right? That makes a whole lot of sense, that Toronto would want. I don't know.
Not
Um,
Harrison Barnes. I don't know. Like,
like
I don't think
yeah,
they would
because
want to give up Malik Monk in that deal either. I don't think the Raptors would probably want him. You know.
right, it would have to. Yeah, that type of deal would be like, you know, guys where it's like, yeah, just take on some of these guys that we probably don't really need anymore. Like take
Right.
on Barnes, take on Herder, take on, because I think Herder now has been moved to the second unit, right?
Yes,
Where
he
now
has.
they start Chris Duarte now,
Yes,
so that
which
might
is
be a sign.
intriguing.
Yeah, so that could be a sign where like now they may be okay with moving on from like a Kevin Herter and you package guys because
Yeah.
Siakam is one of those guys where if he goes to one of those type of teams, he could potentially like swing the balance, um,
Agreed.
and take one of those teams that was kind of like on the fence to like, oh, now this is a contender, right? What if he goes to like, I'm not saying it'll happen. What if he goes to like an Oklahoma City or something like that?
Holy moly! Now that would be crazy, huh?
Yeah, because that's another team, that's kind of waiting in the wings. We've talked about it before, right? They've been on a tear as of late.
Yeah.
I know they lost Hawks, but outside of that, they've only lost, I think, one other game in the last 10-ish games. I
Yeah,
think that was to the Lakers. Right, so they could be another one of those teams where we've talked about it before. They have the picks and they have some young guys and expiring contracts that they could give up. Um, to bring in some more talent. So
it would
that's
be
the
intriguing
but
if they get
again, it's
rid of
like
like somebody like Giddy or something like that.
it could be like an Usman Jang or
Yeah,
what is his name? Alexis Pokushevsky, I think is his
yeah,
name, right?
yeah.
One of those guys, like guys that aren't really playing.
Mm-hmm.
Throw in Davis Bertans and throw in some picks or something
Yeah,
like that.
like they could really
And
come up with a sweet deal. Like I actually like that a lot.
yeah,
Is
it's
it
just a
likely
matter
though?
of right, yeah, and that's the thing. It's just a matter for Oklahoma City, right? Is that are they at a point where they're like, all right, we need to buy in, we need to get, a star, another guy now, or should they just, kind of just decide to make like a minor move and be like, we need another big next to Chet, like some type of 4 or 5 or
Right.
something like that. So do they make a smaller move or do they make a major move, right? Because they're one of those teams where if they get another piece, they could potentially have, the chance to make a deep run much earlier than we would have
Yeah.
expected. So, those a lot of those type of teams, like I said, Warriors, Kings, Oklahoma City, those are the type of teams that I think should be on the lookout for. Can they get like a Pascal
Yeah.
Siakam or some other star on some other team right down the road ends up in trade rumors because we're getting to that point now, right? I think the trade deadline is a little more than a month away. Um, what is it, like February 8th or
Yeah.
whatever it is?
And that's when we'll be kicking
So
off our first live stream of the year. So
right, exactly. So that's, so you're getting towards that point where teams are going to start to kind of think about, all right, we need to start, how do we improve our roster? If we're a buyer and if we're a seller, which guys can we move to get back stuff from? So,
yeah.
I think, I don't think Toronto is necessarily quite done yet in terms of doing something. The Knicks, I think it could be a little bit tougher because they don't have, as much stuff, to send out
Yeah.
anymore. I mean, they have like a couple of guys, I guess, like like an Evan Fournier, or a couple other, like random guys that aren't really playing a whole
Sure.
lot, but not much at this point, right? Like, so I don't know necessarily if they can. They do have a lot of picks, so from that perspective, you could be like, all right, let's throw some expirings or and combine contracts of guys that don't really play, and then throw in
Hmm.
a multiple picks and see what we can do. I just don't know if that deal is out there right now, but I think that they're at least going to try to be aggressive because, you know, I think they have a pretty interesting, group of guys, in there in terms of, like I said, you see the identity, you see what they're trying to build there. It's just a matter of, again, then you factor in, could this do some good stuff for Julius Randle, right? Where it's like, now that it's Anunoby instead of Barrett, he's got more room, to
Yeah.
work
More
inside.
touches too.
And you almost kind of wonder, like, now is it possible that it could be like too much, Julius Randle, where it's like, now that Barrett's gone, he's going to be taking, a lot more shots than you would probably like him to,
I
because
don't
it
think
doesn't
that's going
seem
to be the
like
case though.
right, because it's kind of interesting where they mention like Anunoby, he's there and he's gonna get more touches. It doesn't really feel like that they're like completely you know built. It doesn't seem like that they're like kind of running like a ton of like crazy plays from where it's like,
Yeah.
all right, let's take advantage of his offensive talent.
Yeah. They don't
It's
look
more
to
so,
him.
yeah, it's like it's more so like right place, right time. Not that they don't call any plays for him, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like they're
But
not
that's how
giving
his
him the
game
ball.
is though. I always felt like.
So that's where I kind of wonder, the Randall factor. But either way, again, like I think both of these teams have the potential to do something else. It's just a matter of like with the Raptors, right? Like you're probably just gonna swap, and send out like Siakam for either young players and picks or expiring contracts and picks or something like
And
that.
I
We'll
think
see.
they need to do that. They need to go that route and acquire more youth. I think that should be their goal, especially, if they're going to commit to a full rebuild. I don't think, it would be smart to go out and say, like, Siakam for, another star where it's like, okay, no, let's just get some youth and picks, like you were saying.
Right, because yeah, exactly. And the thing is, like you know, they they've mentioned they still want to remain competitive, so like they're not going to take like a super low ball
Right.
offer, right? Again, Barrett and quickly, that's a solid return,
Yeah.
for OG Anunoby because those are two solid young players. It's not like you're getting back, like guys that aren't really playing or like guys that are like kind of at the end of their careers or
Right.
on the last year of their deals. You're getting back like solid talent. So I think if I don't know what they do because again, they could be like, well, we got more than what we might have thought back for Anunoby, so then maybe we could not, maybe we could be okay with getting like a different type of return for Siakam.
Hmm.
But either way, I think they should pull off some type of deal. It's just a matter of who's going to be calling and which one has the best deal, which is
Yeah.
typically the case with all these trades. I'm just curious to see which team ends up getting him because I think if
Yeah.
it's one of those type of teams, then I think like there's a chance where it's like, oh, now that team could potentially be, the team to beat out in the Western Conference. You just don't know yet because
Yeah.
there's a lot of, teams in the West that I think, if you ask them today, like, do we have a shot? They might say like, yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Even with as good as Denver's been, at the same time, it's just you just never know, right? Because like it's not like they're having, it's not like they've been, far and away the best team in the Western
Yeah.
Conference.
Everybody's had their struggles, really.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see. But like I said, I think so far solid start for both of these teams. I think both teams should be happy with what they've gotten back, and hopefully it works out for both teams.
Yeah.
Especially for the guys involved, because again, with Ananobi, you're in a bigger market now. You're gonna get paid. You're on a team where I guess you get more shine. For sure, just because now that he's on that Knicks team, he's gonna get more attention, right? Because they just
Mm-hmm.
gave up guys to get him, and then with Barrett and Quickly, you're in a different place now. You're both starting. You're both going to be, playing decent sized roles for your
Yeah.
team. Quickly, yeah, because Quickly was a 6 man. Now he's starting. You're going to get paid, so hopefully it works out.
Yeah. I think it's a big deal. I think it's, like you said, um, not necessarily trading places, but more so like, it's time for all these guys to step up. I think Ananobi's got a lot to prove in terms of, hey, I can be more than just a two-way impact player, or a phenomenal two-way impact player at that. And then RJ Barrett, I can be more than just a tunnel vision player. And then quickly, I can be more than a 6 man. So I think all these guys have great potential upside, and I think the teams do as well for the future.
Yeah. So moving on into our next story, kind of something that was really interesting. So,
Yeah.
the other day, the Lakers and the Heat played. No Jimmy Butler, but the Heat pretty much won wire to wire. It was 110-96. Just a kind of a weird game. It was a pretty ugly game. Even though the Heat won by double digits, up until the fourth quarter, they didn't play very well. The Lakers managed to play worse. They had 10 turnovers in the first quarter, I think 20 through 3 quarters. Um, and just like overall, just a very disengaged, dispirited, kind of just lethargic performance. Which is just kind of bizarre, right? After, so many guys on the team, had talked about, like, yeah, we kind of have to start, digging deep and get ready because, they're in a rough spot now. They're below 500. But, the way that that game, panned out, right? Then the next morning, right? So less than 12 hours later, you get a story, from The Athletic, through Shams Charania and Jovan Buha, where they put out a report, um, basically about the idea that it's not a happy locker room right now, right? Where, um, basically they got six sources, apparently to back this up, which is kind of
It's
wild. You
wild.
don't
Yeah.
normally hear that, usually you just hear like, an anonymous source from within the Lakers or whatever team's organization, or,
Yeah.
sources say, right? You don't normally hear like a specific number, but they basically said there's a lot of disjointedness, between the coaching staff, and the players, and a lot of it stems from the extreme rotation and starting lineup adjustments recently from Ham, which is, I guess, kind of put a lot of players out of rhythm. And the main one that they cited, which was the one that we talked about before, which was really bizarre and kind of confusing, where they benched D'Angelo Russell and
Mhm.
they started LeBron, Torian, Reddish, Vanderbilt, AD, right, where there were like no guards
Yeah.
or no guards or secondary ball
Right.
handlers. And we talked about it where it was kind of strange, right? I know D'Angelo Russell hadn't played well, but it was still kind of bizarre that that was the adjustment that was made. They did win that game, against the Thunder, but it had more so to do with you had a crazy, LeBron and AD game, right? Like LeBron had 40 in that game, started the same lineup against the Celtics, and it didn't necessarily work. Um, the last couple of games, right, they changed the lineups multiple times. Some of that was because guys were in and out, right? Like Rui
Yeah.
started in a game, then he got hurt. So and then like I think in another lineup, I think he got hurt in like the same game in like the first few minutes. So then, against the Heat, right, they changed the starting lineup again, and this time they brought back Austin Reeves, which, again, to me, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense that if Russell was taken out, why not just put Reeves back in? Because
Hmm.
if the reason why they were split up was because they can't play together, why is it okay for them to play together off the bench?
Right.
Just didn't make a whole lot of sense. Um, and it's rough because again, like it's a combination of like, you know, if let's say, the lineups work, right? Well, then it's like, some guys aren't going to be happy because the positions and playing times that they were promised, they're not getting. And then it's like, well, if you change it quickly back, then it's like you basically acknowledge that it didn't work, and now like everybody's like, what is this guy doing?
Right.
Um, so like that, it's a lot of weird stuff because we talked about it. How like it's so bizarre how a bunch of their higher paid players aside from LeBron and AD were no longer starting. Right, like Rui was not starting, which I didn't really expect, but we thought like he would have had an opportunity just because he got paid.
Mm-hmm.
But like D'Lo was no longer starting. You just paid him, although he's making less than he did before. Reeves, right? He got paid. He was no longer starting. Vanderbilt got an extension. He was no longer starting. Then they put him back in. Then they took him out in this game, right? So, in exchange for like, Torian Prince, who just came to the team, $4 million, he's starting. Cam Reddish on a minimum contract, he's starting. So it's just a lot of bizarre,
It's awkward.
up and down movements. I don't think it's all completely on the coaching. Like some of those guys
Mm-mm.
have just kind of underperformed, I
Mm-hmm.
think. Like D'Lo, who was very good in the first month of the season. He was. I think we said he was basically like it seemed like he was their third best player to start the season. He's been one of their worst players in the
Yeah,
last
for
month.
sure.
Yeah, to the point where not only was he coming off the bench, he wasn't playing a whole lot. Um, Reeves started the season off pretty poorly, and he was moved to the second unit. And I guess some of the frustration for some of these guys is like, hold on a second. Guys like a Cam Reddish or a Torian Prince could have long stretches where they're not playing well. Because there was a stretch earlier in the season where Prince couldn't hit a shot. Same with Reddish, where he just couldn't hit a shot. And those guys, have never, been moved to the second unit. Whereas the other guys, they might have like 5 straight bad games and then they get moved to the bench.
Sure.
Guys like Christian Wood, right? He was playing a lot early in the season. Then he just had a long stretch where he wasn't playing at all. Now he's playing again, right? Then there were other times where like Jackson Hayes was out there. Sometimes Jackson Hayes out there with Christian Wood. Sometimes Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood and Anthony Davis playing together, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So it just kind of feels like there's a lot of disjointedness right now, right? From, the coaching staff, right? That doesn't seem like they really know how to use, some of the players on this team. Because, it's disappointing where you're below 500. LeBron and AD have basically played just about every game. I think LeBron has missed 3, AD's missed 2. You shouldn't be below 500. I mean, you can quibble about maybe the roster just isn't as good as you thought, but it should be better than this. And, and then like, even in post game conferences, right? Where like, last night, Austin Reeves and Anthony Davis were like, well, we can't use injuries as an excuse for how poorly we're playing. And then Darvin Ham is like, well, we can't really judge the team until we're healthy because we kept getting hurt. And I don't know how you can have two different responses to that. So
Sure.
it doesn't make a lot of sense. So, again, we've mentioned they're 17th and 18. They were 14-9 coming off the in-season tournament, and they
Mm-hmm.
looked like that. Hey, now it's a top 5 seed.
Mm-hmm.
With a chance to make some waves and move up. But now they're down to 10th, I think, tied with Golden State. Depending on the outcome of this Nuggets Warriors game that's going to start relatively soon. So, um, yeah, none of it's good. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I don't really know where you go from there. I mean, I guess you only really have two options because it's either the coaching staff, kind of comes together and actually like figures something out that makes a lot more sense than
Mm-hmm.
what we're seeing right now. Because again, that lineup to me never made sense. Like if you're gonna bench D'Lo, I think you should start Austin.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, like there's other flaws regardless, but just in general, I think there is a way to make it better. So I think, this is going to go two ways. Either the coaching staff, because again, this is all out here now, right? Because there have been some people I know. I think it was Anthony Irwin of Blue Wire Pods. He was kind of one of the first people to put this out before Shams and Jovan Buab, put out this article. Some other people who cover the Lakers have also kind of mentioned maybe some stuff is going on, um, but basically, now it's all out there. So now everybody knows. Everybody knows what's going on. So, like I said, you have two options. Either the coaching staff figures something out and you can go on a run and kind of, fix this. Because I do think some of it is fixable. Some of it, like, you're probably just going to have better talent, like more two-way guys, some more downhill threats. But then some of it also is like, you just got to make better decisions from the coaching staff and from some of the players as well. Um, so it's all bad. Like I said, some guys have underperformed. The coaching staff has underperformed. And I think that's kind of what's gotten to this point. So they either need to fix that or you're going to have a situation where by the end of the season, Ham might be on his way out, right? Like, I mean, because we talked about it before where I think you kind of posed the idea of do you think Darvin Ham was on the hot seat? And,
Mm-hmm.
obviously I don't have inside sources, right? It's kind of
Yeah.
just based off of what I think, and
Right.
from what people who cover the team have been saying, where it didn't seem like that was the case. But now you're at a point where, let's say the season's over, and they are in the play-in, and then they lose, or like, they just miss the play-in entirely for one reason or another, right? Then that's probably a scenario where, yeah, he could be gone. I'm not saying he will be fired because there is a chance to turn this around, but it's not looking great for him right now. So he's gonna have to figure some stuff out, and I think it starts with lineups that make more sense, schematics that make more sense, play calling that makes more
Mm-hmm.
sense. And it sucks because for him, because again, like you had an idea, some type of vision of what you wanted the roster to be. Like when we were talking about them in the offseason, we thought it was going to be a more offensive oriented team where
Yeah.
defense would be more of the issue. But instead, like their offense is just bad, right?
Yeah.
Like I think they moved up to 23 on offense, yay. But like I mean
That ain't
that's
good.
still horrible. Yeah, that's not good enough to be a contender. You
No.
got to at least be, at worst above average, right? Like, again, we know historically you're usually top 10 in both categories. They've been a top 10 defensive team. At one point, they were seventh. I think they've dropped to 10. And part of that is when the offense is so bad at a certain point, right? That bleeds into the defense where, if you're consistently not being able to score, not being able to generate good offense, the other team will take advantage. If you keep turning the ball over, if you keep missing a ton of makeable shots, I mean, we saw that happen with the Heat last night, right? Where they played zone, the Lakers had no real strategy or plan to attack it, and every time they would get kind of close, right? The Heat would stop them with the zone, then they'd get right back out and score pretty quickly. So, um, yeah, like I said, none of this is good. It doesn't surprise me, like I said, that a story like this comes out just
Mm-hmm.
because, again, some people close to the team kind of were putting some stuff like that out there, and just the way that it looked, right? Because even like because there were games like maybe a couple weeks ago where they were losing, but it looked better, right? Where it's like
Sure.
he just lost, right? Like some guys played poorly, but you gave effort. Like there was a Minnesota game, I think it was about a week ago, right? Right before New Year's,
Mm-hmm.
where they lost. That was the weird game, with the LeBron instant replay three or whatever that was. And they competed pretty much the whole game, right?
Sure.
Like that, you just lost to a team that played better. But then like
Mm-hmm.
this was just like, what even happened, right? Like I watched the whole game and none of it made any sense to me, right? Like I hadn't even mentioned, right? Like there was a stretch where like I think in the second quarter, right, Jalen Hood Scafino, the rookie, comes in. Didn't really make any sense why he was out there.
Mm-hmm.
Made even less sense after he was out there.
Yep.
So I mean, yeah, I mean, you can go into it as well, but yeah, it's just none of it's good right now, and it's kind of disappointing because again, I feel like I know we talked about Ham a lot last year, where there were times where we were kind of like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
But it felt like it got better, right? It felt like over the course of the season there was at least some level of progress,
Come
right? Like some
playoffs, I think we were kind of high on him
Right, yeah, because
or
some of it
higher.
was like had better, yeah, like some of it was you had better players, you had a
Mm-hmm.
roster that made more sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I also thought like he just did a better job in terms of what was going on. But I think now like it's definitely been a step back. And like I said, I think some of that is when you have a vision and that vision doesn't work out, well, that's a problem, right? Because again, especially when it, kind of conflicts with who's on the roster, right? Because I'm assuming that a lot of the players going in probably were like, all right, we're going to run this back. We're adding some other pieces, right? And we're just going to build off of what we did. But like, there's nothing that's been built off of last year. Like I said, you got multiple guys playing major roles that were not on the team last year. While guys that were on the team last year that played well in the playoffs, right? Either don't play a whole lot or barely play, right? Like I know Rui's kind of been like in and out of the lineup because of injuries, but even when he's out there, right? There's like some games where he plays a decent amount and plays well. There's some games where he starts, and then there's some games where he barely plays at all, right? And
Yeah.
then Austin Reeves, his minutes for whatever reason up until the last couple of games were capped like at 27, 28 minutes. I don't really know why.
Yeah.
Uh, because he's
It doesn't make sense.
yeah,
I
because
think there's so many questions.
right, because he's essentially been their third best player.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like then the other night, right, like Rui starts. I think it was like no guards, right? It was like Vando, Rui, um, LeBron, AD, and Prince, and he was like, yeah, this is going to be the starting lineup going forward. And then the very next game, it changes.
Yeah.
Now I think part of that was because Rui was out,
Mm-hmm.
but like still, like it just doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't really know what like it's just bizarre because like this wasn't an issue earlier in the season, right? Because again, coming off the in-season tournament, we thought there was real progress because, they looked kind of weird in the beginning of the season. They didn't look very good, but they got better. And then we were like, oh, now we can see the identity. Now we can see how some of the pieces fit. But now, like, we're back to, okay, now what? And I guess the question is, now what? Because, like I said, there's a couple of paths, for this team. You either go on a run, and you fix this stuff with the coaching staff. Maybe you upgrade the roster with a trade, and then just see where it goes from there. Because again, you're kind of like at a spot where like the other teams above you are starting to separate themselves. It's not like it's impossible, but it's going to be very difficult to catch up. And you have to do it now because January, unlike December, is a much more favorable stretch. A lot of home games, very limited amount of travel. Even a lot of the road games themselves are still in the state of California. So for most of the month, they barely leave the state at all.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the stretch where like we're gonna get to see, what direction this team is gonna go in.
Yeah.
'Cause
What are they made of?
on a run, and then they're gonna look closer. Maybe not great, but like look closer to what we thought they could be. Or it's going to continue to suck and Darvin Ham's going to get fired. Or if not fired, he's going to be on, a seat that's about as hot as any seat in the NBA right now.
Yeah, I mean it's tough. I really don't even know where to start. But obviously, I guess we should start with the losses. They somewhat have been piling up, and that's clear. The frustration I think is clear. I think this is a direct result of losing. The disconnect is most likely due to all the changes, like you were saying. But it's hard to really even fathom this because I think in the offseason, after we saw the kind of offseason they had, I know I was a little bit higher on them. I think I had them projected like top 3. I think you had them top 5 seed for sure. Like we thought they were going to be, top of the league, but I don't know. It's so weird. Like everything that we thought this roster was constructed for has kind of just blown up in their faces. The depth has 100% failed. It seems like the bench is practically non-existent, and even the top end talent is pretty rough because I think it's not fair. As great as LeBron is, it's not fair of the Lakers organization and the coaching staff and his teammates to ask him to be a top 5 player at 39 years old. I think that's unrealistic. I think he has moments where he is a top 5 player, top 10 player obviously, but consistently every night I don't think that's possible. And this Miami game is a perfect example of why this roster is so bad. When he has an off night, they are probably going to lose. And I'm not saying, when I say a LeBron off night, I don't mean like, he shoots like 40-something% from the field. But I'm talking like an abysmal game like this where, he does shoot 0 for 6 from 3. That's bad. 6 for 18, only 12 points. The impact isn't there. But nobody else is there to pick up the slack. D'Lo's not present. I guess you could say AD somewhat present. But like yeah, like I don't have a problem with AD. I don't think AD is the issue here at all. It is really the role players and the guys that are on this roster that are not LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Honestly, I don't really know what to say. It seems like they lost their grit. They lost their identity. And they just need to simplify things. I know it's kind of hard to say that, when a lot of guys aren't doing their jobs. I think it's like a culmination of things where it's like the coaching staff clearly isn't doing their job. The players aren't. Well, some of them aren't because, they're not playing up to par and up to standard because I think we know that they're better than this for sure. I don't think, sitting at what is their record? 17-18? That's rough. I don't think anybody expected them to be there, and I think that's another thing is they're probably mad at themselves.
3-9 since the in-season tournament.
That's bad, man. I mean, how do you come off of a in-season tournament victory? It's kind of crazy saying that for the first time, but I don't know. How do you come off of an in-season tournament victory and just kind of like fall flat like this? I don't understand.
Yeah.
And clearly, there is a disconnect. And it's funny, like, even if this report didn't come out, I'm sure people would be able to decipher and just piece things together based off of, the post-game stuff. Like you said, talking about injuries, when when injuries aren't really the problem, I think that's the thing. They need to just reflect. Yeah. And it's like they need to reflect and just look inward, honestly. I just don't know what to say. There's no grit. There's no fight. It seems like some guys have checked out already, like you said. And I think benching people, swapping people in and out, that does more damage than, good. That's what I would say. It hurts people's confidence. you're losing the locker room because now people think you're an imbecile because you don't know what you're doing. And I think we've been kind of hinting at that for a little while now, over the past couple of weeks and even going back to last season. There are times when he looks like a competent coach, but then there's other times where it's like, how is this guy a head coach in the NBA in 2023, 2024? You know,
Yeah.
I don't know. But the problem is they rely on Braun too much. I think that's the number one problem. And I don't think that was the case going into, this season. I think we looked at this roster and we were like, okay, there's some legitimate options where, they can relieve some pressure and give LeBron some rest. D'Lo could take some pressure off, run the PNR. Reeves looked promising. Rui looked good. But then everything kind of just went kaput. And now it's like, if Braun has a bad game, you're probably going to lose it. And yeah, it's rough.
Yeah. And keep in mind, last year, after the deadline, there were a lot of games where LeBron was out,
Mm-hmm.
and they still, ended up winning a lot of those games. Right now, I mean, again, you can factor in the stuff like, well, they were playing harder, and all the other things. Like every game was like kind of like almost their last game. But yeah, it's just odd because it definitely felt like going into the season that this team was better than last year's, and I guess it is, just because of how they started off last year, but. Yeah, there's some stuff that's gonna have to be figured out, like I said, over the next month.
Did you see the Reeves quote?
Which one?
He was like, when I say the vibe is off, it's not like we don't like each other. That one,
Right.
like it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's like a tussle kind of thing or like a fight. It's
Right.
just clearly a difference in, I guess, philosophy, opinion, strategy. But they just need to dumb it down and go back to simple ball. I think they're trying to do too much. And when I say they, I'm talking about the coaching staff. They're doing too much, trying too much. You just got to be consistent and go with what works. And I think we did see somewhat of a winning formula, at the beginning of the season and even in the in-season tournament. And I know some of that is predicated on guys actually doing their job. But hey, sometimes you don't have to give up on somebody after a game, 1 game, 2 games, 3 games, 4 games, maybe even 5. I think once you get to that 10 territory, it's looking rough. I mean, look at the Clippers. They turned it around, So I think, you just got to ride it out. You don't have to be so indecisive. I think that's the issue here.
Yeah, because that's the interesting thing about the Clippers, right? Where like they've kind of in a way, played probably the best basketball of any team, as of late, other
Agreed.
than maybe like Oklahoma City. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and like you said, we were because initially it was funny because we liked that trade, initially for
Yeah.
both teams. We thought that both teams got better,
Mm-hmm.
because of it, and then it looked like we had egg on our faces after the Clippers looked so horrible,
Sure.
to begin that, and then like you said, they were able to, turn things around, and I'm sure there were a bunch of Clipper fans that were like, oh my gosh, Ty Lue needs to go,
Yeah.
and all. And I mean, Ty Lue, in fairness, has a better, acumen or certainly a better resume because he's already
Yeah.
been a championship coach. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
saying that like there I think there is a path to turn it around. I don't know how good you can actually get, because you already made a lot of changes that have already not worked. So now you have to
Yeah.
spend time to fix that again.
They've
It's going to take
impacted
some
it
time.
negatively so bad. Like
Right. Yeah,
chemistry is
exactly.
down 500%. We're in the
Right.
danger zone, nuclear.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess, then it's like, but then it's like going forward, what should the starting lineup actually be? Because, it's like,
Sure.
I know D'Lo's out, but like, it's like, do you bring him back in there, because, or, well, like, do you try to say like, okay, Reeves and D'Lo was horrible on defense, but maybe we could try with Vanderbilt, or maybe we just
Mm-hmm.
kind of give up on that because Vanderbilt's offense, is just completely nosedive. Again, and he wasn't like a great offensive player last year, but it's gotten even worse, right? Where it's like, now he looks away from the basket, when he's driving. So, but I don't know. Like I said, I think, the combination of the underperformance from the players and the coaching staff, I think also, like I said, just exposes some more of the flaws. You just also don't have enough two-way guys.
Yep.
Like there's guys we've talked about it before, right? There's guys that are good defensive players, but negative offensive players, right? Like Vanderbilt, like Reddish. There are guys that are good offensive players, but not so great defensively, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
like a D'Lo, like an Austin Reeves. So you got to get more of those type of guys in there. Get some more athleticism as well. That was a concern that I had in the offseason, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, you miss having like a quick athletic guy that can just kind of get to the basket. And that's probably where some people make the idea of like, let's go get Zach LaVine. But like just in general, um,
Is that
You know,
really
like
going
I
to
said,
help
that
though? Because I feel like he's
right,
just like a glorified, athletic version of D'Lo,
right,
somewhat.
exactly.
I don't know.
Like
You
that's
know.
the thing. It's just, the question is how do you fix, the offense? Because again, like if you're a bottom third, I think last I checked, I think they're below your team, the Wizards on offense, which
Yeah.
shouldn't be at all because
No.
there's a difference in the level of talent.
You've got
So
two, great, phenomenal players. I think,
there's
two top 10
no
players on occasional nights like that.
right,
I don't know. And like it's so hard to talk about this team sometimes because I feel like the answers might not even be on this roster, That might be the issue. So I think they're probably going to have to look at something on the deadline. Or
yeah,
like you said, they either got to look at the deadline, figure out how to win games, or Ham's
right,
probably gone because I think he's
yeah,
gonna not necessarily go down as a scapegoat, but he's definitely gonna have to take the full brunt of responsibility for this because there's been some coaching lapses, like you said, rotational, schematic, everything in the
right.
book. I think there's been a lapse
He's
for
gonna
him.
be the fall guy, if
Yes,
they end up, underperforming. He's gonna
yes,
end up being the guy, that's gonna be gone. And but then like the question is, even if he were to get fired, who do you bring in, right? Because I don't think he'd be fired like midway through the season unless it gets like really bad, where like
hmm
guys are just like fighting or something like
right,
that.
right,
Um, so it's like who on that roster as an assistant, right? Because they don't really have like anybody, that was like, oh, this guy used to be like a good head coach and now he's, being an assistant for, younger head coaches, right? Like I think when Vogel was there, right, they had like Jason Kidd, they had Lionel Hollins,
hmm
they had a number of guys, right? And now, I mean, they have some guys, but they're not like I don't think they've ever been head coaches. I think
right,
like a guy like Chris Gent, who I think was an offensive guy for other teams. I mean, like, Phil Handy, who's like a developmental guy.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, you don't have like, maybe he's the guy, but like, outside of that, like, you can't really hire somebody externally, I think, if it's midway through the season. That's more of an off-season thing. But
yeah,
regardless, I still think there's things you can do now to make it better. I don't know how much better it can be, but it's certainly got to be better than this because
yeah,
it's just like, again, you have enough, I think, to win games right now. Not, I mean, like, yeah, like it would be nice to have all your players, but you're probably not. And most teams don't have all their players, over the course of the season. You know what I mean? So it's like you just got to find some ways to win. And if you have LeBron and AD and like at least a few decent players, you should have a good chance to win. Because I think like even net rating wise, I think like those two together like have a net rating I think of like +1,
yeah,
right? Which shouldn't be like you're only 1 point better than other teams when both of
yeah,
those guys are out there, and that's because of this recent slide or whatever.
hmm
And then it's like when one of them is off the floor, something happens, right? I think, when LeBron's off the floor, right, the offense takes a nosedive.
yes,
When AD's off the floor, the defense kind of, slips, I guess.
hmm
Although, some of the net ratings say the defense has been worse when it's like LeBron off the floor and AD off and AD on. But I
hmm.
think some of that has to do with, again, some of the weird lineups where it's like, we're going to have, four offensive players that can't really defend next to
Ah,
Anthony, you know,
gosh, bro.
like, yeah, or like, oh, we're gonna have, four defensive players that can't score next to LeBron. Like, just weird stuff
Yeah.
like that. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And
There's a
like I said,
severe lack of situational awareness, and I think
right.
everybody knows that.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we're talking about it, but we're talking about it now. So this stuff has already been brewing for a while,
Oh
because
yeah.
again, these things come up out of nowhere. And like you said, when you're losing, right, that's when a lot of these things, tend to come out, right? Winning cures all.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can find a way to win, and do it in a way that, is pretty, decisive, that's when everybody's going to feel a lot better. But if you keep losing, right, it's only going to get worse and you're going to lose some guys that you probably need. You know what I mean? Because again, like it's probably not a good idea to make Austin Reeves ticked off, right? Because this guy was a pretty good contributor for the Lakers team last year. And aside from the horrible start at the beginning of the season, has been much better as of late, right? You have some guys that I think can contribute long term to the team, but you got to figure it out, and that's what they get paid to do. That's what the coaches get paid to do, and that's why we talk about, um, coaching does matter at the NBA level. I'm not going to say that like they're the most important part of the team, but we've
It's a big
stressed
factor
like
though.
yeah, it's important to have a quality coaching staff because again, you see like with a team like a Miami, when you have a guy like an Eric Spoelstra, that's how you can get the best out of your team, right? Like because again, there's no way the Heat should have been able to make the NBA Finals, last year. Obviously Jimmy Butler's awesome, but still, like you didn't look at that team going into the playoffs as a team that could get to the finals.
No,
Um,
no.
and again, that's what happens when you have a really good coach. And again, they're Spoelstra's the best coach, so that's kind of like a high bar to clear. But regardless, like when you have a good coach, that can make up for some type of holes in your roster because they can just find ways to optimize guys in roles that you wouldn't even think.
Yeah,
Because it's like say, at one time, right, a lot of people really liked what Steve Kerr did, right? Right, David Lee moved to the bench, Draymond was brought in, and all of a sudden he's kind of used like in a way that we haven't really seen guys be used before,
hmm
right? Where he's defending bigger players, he's playing center, he's running point. So just stuff like that, right? Where it's like can we see more of that? And I don't expect like a lot because I don't feel like he's like a great coach, but I think we've seen better from him because again, like I said,
yeah,
we saw in the playoffs, we saw decent changes, right? That if he didn't make, right, the Lakers would have felt, they would have fallen out of the playoffs or not even made the playoffs, with some of the changes.
yeah.
Some of them were kind of obvious, I guess, where it's like, start Austin Reeves, but then there's other stuff where we're like that most people probably wouldn't have thought, right? Like, starting Schroeder at the end of the Warriors series, right? Putting Lonnie Walker right into that series when he wasn't really much of a factor towards the
Right.
end of the season. Just playing drop or whatever against Golden State. All these other things, that we've seen him be able to do. It's just
hmm
like can we get more of that
Can he
version
be
back?
consistent? Can he tap into
Yeah,
it?
that consistency.
Yes. It's
Yeah,
horrible.
like I'm exactly yeah, because like again,
And
when
Laker
he's at
fans
his
should be angry. Just saying.
right, when he's at his best, he can help you. In ways where you can win some games. You could potentially win a playoff series, like we saw
Yeah.
last year. At his worst,
Hmm.
yeah, he can lose you some games, because of
Yeah.
his bizarre decisions, right? Even beyond the timeouts, because we haven't even mentioned that at all, right? Like that
Yeah.
was
Clock
something I
management.
guess we kind of complained about last season, I think at times,
hmm
but like this season, like that's the least of the issues. So,
For sure.
yeah, like yeah, it's panic time, I guess, in a way, where it's like this needs to be paid attention to. Where like they got to figure some stuff out because I just don't think they should be a below 500 team. I know they've had a tough schedule. I know they've had guys in and out of the lineup, but it still should be better. A lot of these games that they've lost, many of them were winnable games. Like last night was a winnable game. I mean, even
Yeah.
as horrible, I mean, they played so horrible, but at the same time, like just going into the game, that's not a game that you go in and think like, oh yeah, well, this is a scheduled loss. Like,
Right.
yeah, we're going into Miami. We've had multiple days off. Butler's not playing. We are going to lose this game. Like, no, like
Yeah.
a lot of
Especially
these games
without
were
Jimmy.
very exactly. Yeah, a lot of these, and I think other Heat guys as well. A lot of
Yeah.
these games were very winnable. A lot of the games coming up are very winnable, right? Like, you're not looking at this next stretch of games and be like, yeah, we should lose every single game. Now, if you're gonna play like this, then yeah, you're probably gonna lose every single game. But
Yeah.
there's got to be a better version in there somewhere.
We'll see.
Somewhere.
I think it
Yeah,
is
we'll
down the line, but it's going to take a rude awakening, and I think that some people just learn the hard way. And I think that's what this Lakers team and specifically the coaching staff are going to have to endure.
I mean, yeah. I mean, is there like anybody that you think should be playing more? I know some people have mentioned a guy like a Max Christie. But like, is there anybody specifically, before we move on to the next thing that you think should be playing more? Maybe somebody who should be playing less? Like,
Uh,
what type of specific adjustments do you think they should probably make?
I mean, I really want to see more Reeves. I know that's kind of what everybody's been saying. And I think that should be, your guy because if I'm not mistaken, what he was third, for their scoring. He's their third best scorer, third highest scorer, or something like that. Yeah. So it's like, I mean, he's got to be out there more than Torian Prince now, right? So I mean, it's. I just don't understand the minutes restriction cap, but I know now what D'Lo has this contusion in his back or
Yeah,
whatever,
took a
tailbone.
charge.
Yeah,
Took a charge, and I think he, all of a sudden, left the game, and now he's been out for a while. I'm not saying anything. You know what I mean? Like, it's
yeah,
just,
I get you.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's a weird thing,
yeah,
and it's
it's
kind
a,
of
it's an
funny.
injury.
And it's kind of funny, like not that, but like just it's kind of funny where like since he's been out, you can kind of see where it's like, oh, this is why when he plays well, that's one of the things that makes them better, right? Because he can bring some things to the table where
Absolutely.
when he's playing well, it helps the Lakers. But the problem is when you get the bad version of D'Angelo Russell, like you get a guy who probably really just shouldn't be playing a whole lot, and
Isn't that
then you lose.
funny? Sounds like a parallel between him and Ham. That's interesting.
Right, and then it's like, you lose certain skill sets that could really be useful, right? Because like you lose a guy who can pass out of the pick and roll. You lose a guy who can shoot off the dribble and hit some tough shots. And it's like, if he's completely lost his confidence and he's just not playing well, then it's brutal. Because we already talked about last year when they acquired him, how when he plays well, the Lakers typically win, right? Because he's going to help them at least offensively, right? Like he's not going to help on defense, but
Right.
at least offense, right? He can kind of make up for some of the, offensive issues that you have. So,
Yeah.
as long as he's on the roster, he needs to be. He's one of the other guys that I think is gonna have to
Yeah.
just better. Like as
Yeah.
long
It's
as he's on
both
the
of them.
roster.
It's
Yeah,
both of them.
exactly. Like, I mean, it's a lot of guys, but just in
Yeah.
general, right? He's a guy where it's like you look at his splits, from November compared to December, and like it's pretty jarring.
He
I
can
mean, like
stop the bleeding, though. That's the thing. If he just
right.
plays well, I think, you'll see somewhat of a turnaround, and I think people will probably have a little bit more faith in the Lakers.
Right. I mean, again, like the month of November, you look at those numbers, right? And he's averaging 18 a game, 6 assists, 50 from the field, 45 from three. And then all of a sudden in the month of December, 10 points, 5 assists, 41 from the field, 33 from three. His minutes are way down, down to like 25 a game. And it would probably be lower if he was playing the minutes that he was playing once he was coming off the bench because
Mm-hmm.
he did start initially in December. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not just him, right? Like, I don't want to make it seem like I'm putting all the blame on him.
Right. That's why I started with Reeves.
Yeah, I hope that I'm not sounding like that. It's just
No.
like, again, yeah, that's the problem. You got a lot of guys underperforming in terms of players. You got the coaching staff underperforming, and when you get all that, mixed with kind of up and down play, that's when you get 500
L's.
teams. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, they got to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And then, finally, I guess for the final topic, right? The first All-Star returns, for All-Star voting have come in. Not too many surprises. I mean, again, like usually we've seen what happens, right? Normally with the first returns, there's a couple of guys that are probably a little higher than you expect.
Sure.
Some guys a little bit lower, and then it usually evens out by the time you get to the second return, and then
Sure.
finally, then they announce the starters on TV or whatever. Of course, the fans is 50% of the vote, right? Then the players is 25, media is 25. So the next update we'll get next week. We'll start with the West with your top three in the front court: LeBron, Durant, and Jokic. And then with the guards, Luka and Steph. And then you look at the East, right? Giannis, Embiid, Tatum, and then with the guards, Tyrese Halliburton actually leading the guards,
My
and then
boy.
Damian second. So what is your kind of takeaway? I guess again it's early. It's the first stretch of All Star voting, but it is kind of interesting, to see a guy like a Halliburton, right, where now he's you know got the most votes amongst guards in the East. I mean, like some of it is there are some guards that were in the East that have now moved west, so that's
Sure.
taken away. Like Harden's no longer there, Kyrie's no longer
Mm-hmm.
there. Um, but also like you probably would also say he's been the best guard in the Eastern Conference so far this year.
Yeah.
Um, but it is just kind of an interesting thing. And then like with the guards, right? Like Luca leading, over Steph kind of surprises me a little
Yeah,
bit.
that's
I mean,
wild.
I'm sure, yeah, and that probably will change.
Mm-hmm.
Once we get to the second returns. But yeah, just kind of take me through like what you're thinking about this because this I think is kind of intriguing. But there are some names where it's not too much of a surprise,
Yeah.
I guess.
I think the front courts are spot on. I think the guards is, like you said, where it gets interesting. Because, I think Halliburton, he's proven a lot this season. He's proven that he can take care of the ball. He's proven that he can, shoot the ball at an elite rate, find his teammates, facilitate, score, everything, and play a little bit of defense. Not, an insane amount, but, he's a willing defender sometimes. So, I think that's well deserved so far. And I know this is, the first fan return, but regardless, to see him, leading the guards in the East is amazing. And what's funny is I would have thought Brunson would have been a little bit higher. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah.
And that might change, later down the line. But I know, Trae Young has been decent. I think, well, not decent. I think he's been severely underrated this season. Damian Lillard's been very good, I think. A guy like Donovan Mitchell and Tyrese Maxey over Jalen Brunson surprises me a lot. That's all I'm saying. But
He's been pretty good though.
for sure. Yeah, I agree. I think Maxey's been great. But I don't know. Something about Brunson being that low is just irking me. I don't know what that is.
And especially it's like usually we talk about, like how the big markets kind of allow for certain guys, to
Yeah,
kind of get in all-star starters or just like get, X amount of votes that they
sure.
probably wouldn't normally get, but it hasn't really worked for Brunson, and he's in New York, which is a very big market, and he's
Hmm.
clearly the best player on the team, and he's a very good player. So,
Yeah,
that's kind of interesting.
yeah.
Whereas Halliburton's in Indiana, which is a smaller market. I know
Hmm.
it's, a big basketball place. But just in general, that is kind of interesting how that hasn't really, leveled out like that. But it
Yeah,
could always change. But I don't really expect Brunson to, get that. I think it's
yeah,
probably gonna be Halliburton and Lillard, as the two starters,
for
just
sure.
because.
Just
Yeah,
based
I
off
mean
her name.
Halliburton's so far ahead.
Hmm.
And then Lillard, like you said, just name wise, I think, and he's playing fine, right? Like
Yeah,
I think he's just a much more recognizable, guy, and he's
agreed.
also playing well.
Yeah,
Um,
agreed.
but like you said, I think the front courts, I guess are pretty spot on, right? Like
Hmm.
it doesn't shock me that like those guys are, are there.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
like that
like
every
maybe
year.
yeah, exactly. Like I mean, like you could say like, oh, well, maybe Kawhi should be up there because the Clippers have been really good,
Sure.
or something like that. But I don't know. Like it doesn't surprise me because again, like with the fan vote, it's always the names first, but also all the guys that are up there. I mean, have a case to be all-star starters. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
agreed.
Yeah. Like yeah, I just kind of wonder what's gonna go on ultimately with the guards.
Yeah,
Because
big deal.
like you said, that's the one where like it could get really interesting. Because again, like you could have Luca and Steph, but like there might be some people who would say like, hey, Shea should be
Yeah,
in
for sure.
with Luca or something like that. Or, obviously like somebody might say, hey, why don't you put Brunson in there instead of Lillard? So,
Yeah.
obviously, eventually we'll do, our all-star, starters or teams or whatever.
Hmm.
I guess teams.
Yeah.
The reserves you don't vote for. It's the coaches, but we'll still do the whole teams. But
Yep.
yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how it changes, and we'll know next week.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I love the early returns. It kind of shows me, it shows us what what fans are thinking about, and who they really think are, the top guys in the NBA. And it's interesting because it's pretty much, I think, on par with what I would probably put. I would probably rearrange the order, obviously, but of these guys, I don't really think there's anybody that doesn't deserve to be on this list. That's what I would say, I guess. I mean, like, because I think you can even make a case for a guy like Victor Wembanyama or Chet for sure. Down at the bottom. So hey, kudos to them, and even like a guy like Paolo. Shout out Paolo too.
Yeah. Yeah, the Paolo one is kind of interesting because he's been playing pretty well. The Magic, unfortunately as a whole,
Yeah.
have struggled. This year we hadn't got into some of those struggling teams, but I guess I'll mention Orlando, right? Where like, they were a team where they started off hot, out of the gates, playing pretty well.
Hmm.
And they've slipped as of late. I mean,
Yeah.
in their last 10 games, um, I believe they are 3-7.
Yeah.
Um,
It's rough.
the offense is just bad. They don't have a point guard. Fultz has been out, pretty much the whole season. I think
Yeah.
he's only played 5 games. I
Hmm.
think one of the last games was when I went to LA and saw him play against the Lakers. That
Oh,
was
that was
one
a
of
while ago.
Yeah, that was in October. So I mean,
Jeez,
he
man.
pretty much hasn't played in quite some time.
Yeah, it hurts.
So yeah, so that's something that the Magic are gonna have to figure out. And again, like I think like they're like positionally wise, like they're not in the thought process of like we have to, be good enough to win a playoff series. I think they're just more like, can we just make the playoffs and can we, put up a fight against, a good team? You know what I
Right.
mean? Like if they play the Sixers in the playoffs and, they lose in like 5 or something like that, I don't think they're gonna be mad. I do think there's a better version of the team just because again some guys have been out, but like at the same time, the offense has been the problem. Kind of like what we mentioned with the Lakers in some
Hmm.
aspects. Like defensively, they're one of the top defenses in Orlando, but on offense, they've just not been very good. And
Yeah.
when you don't have a point guard or any type of guy that can kind of stabilize the offense,
Yeah. It's hard.
slow things down
That's
and get
all I
guys
ask.
good, it makes it even worse, right?
Hmm.
That's the rough part. So,
Yeah.
we'll see. But
Wow.
again, it'll be interesting to see like, if there's going to be any surprises, in that reserve list, right? Because I don't think there's going to be really any surprises like in terms of the all-star starters,
Hmm.
but the reserves I think is where it gets interesting because I think we might see a couple of guys that will be first-time all-stars, right? Like I expect Maxi to be an all-star. Um, I mean, I guess is there anybody else, that you're thinking of? Like, I mean, I don't think Shengun will probably be there.
He
But
should be, I think, but
yeah,
regardless,
I mean, like, yeah, I don't think he will be, but I think there'll be a couple of guys that will be first time All Stars. Out on this list, right? Like Brunson and Maxi, I think should be All Stars, and they were not last year. I mean, Maxi wasn't good enough. I don't think quite good enough to be an All Star last year, but Brunson was.
yeah.
And a lot of that mainly is in the East, just because like the East, some of the talent has moved away.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we already mentioned guys like Kyrie and Harden were in the East. Now they're out West. And some new guys have now come out in the East to replace some of those guys. So I think that's where it's going to be really interesting. Even like a Kuzma, he got, some votes. He got
Yeah.
more votes than Paolo Banchero, and he's
I,
played
I
pretty
I mean,
well.
his numbers
Uh,
look good. It's just
yeah,
the record is rough, because it
right.
is the Wizards.
Yeah, and then like with Porzingis, it's the name, right? Because like Porzingis has played well. He's on,
Mm-hmm.
the team with the best record in the NBA,
Sure.
right? But he's nowhere near, Tatum, or even Jalen Brown. So I
Right.
mean, um, but I mean, it is intriguing. And again,
Yeah.
like I know a lot of people talk about like the fan vote being kind of silly. Trust me, the player votes are pretty silly as well, right?
Yeah.
Like, and
They can be
especially like with
rough.
the player votes, like you don't know who voted for who, but you can see who people voted for, right? Like you can see like,
Absolutely.
oh, this guy got one vote, right? Or like somebody else got one vote. I'm not
Right.
obviously not going to name names because I'm not here to do that, but
Yeah.
like it is kind of always a funny occurrence. We
Yeah.
always get a good laugh out of that.
I think it's a great. I think it's a great service because, hey, like you said, it gives us laughs, but it also shows us what NBA fans are thinking, and it's makes for good commentary, I think, as well.
Right. And then now I guess we can get into, some rumors and news. So the first one, according to Woj, is Draymond's return is expected to be soon. He's going to ramp up training to resume play in the coming days. So he's been out for 11 games, right? Since the December 12th or whatever, 13th incident with Nurkic, right? We already know about
Yeah.
all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, he's been meeting with a counselor. He was ordered to, do that, attend regular Zoom meetings with league and team officials. He's been allowed to be with the team like at practices, but Steve Kerr has said like, he's given us space, we've given him his or whatever. I don't know, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I don't know how much communication there's been. Um, they have been playing better as of late, so I'm curious to see what it looks like when he comes back. How much of a difference he makes. I mean, they weren't that great with him. I mean, I think they were a little above 500 if I'm not mistaken, but still not that amazing. Um, but I almost wonder, like, when he comes back, is he gonna make a big difference for them? Or is there like potentially some type of scenario where like maybe they're thinking like, well, we're playing okay with some of these other guys, so maybe we'll move him to avoid the headaches. I mean, like, do you think which scenario do you think is probably more likely, to occur? Because I mean, like they've been better as of late. I mean, I still don't know if like what I'm seeing is necessarily like that good, but it's definitely better, I guess. They've switched around a lot of stuff, right? They're starting different guys, playing different guys, right? Like Chris Paul's in the starting five now. Um, Kaminga's been playing well. So, I mean, like, what do you think they should end up doing, with this?
Well, I think they need to keep Draymond for sure. I think as much BS that he does, pull on, with the attitude stuff and just the unnecessary stuff. When he keeps it basketball, I think he is a severely underrated player in terms of his impact and what he does bring to Golden State. I think he's one of those glue guys for sure. And even beyond, the chemistry and beyond the leadership, what he does on the court, the off balls, bringing up the ball, taking pressure off of Curry. I think that's very underrated. And it's like if we look at, their most recent games, they've kind of only won against the scrubs, except for, the Boston game for sure. Because, I mean, they beat what? Washington, Portland again. And it's like, okay. And then you beat Boston, but then you lost to Denver, Miami, Dallas. So it's like clearly they're still struggling where they can't beat those upper tier teams. They did beat
Teams,
Orlando.
yeah, and a couple of those teams were shorthanded. Like Miami didn't have Butler. I think
Yeah,
Dallas didn't have Kyrie and some other guys. So
exactly. So I mean, if you can't even beat hobbled upper echelon tier teams, I mean, come on now, what are we doing? So I think they need to keep Draymond. Maybe in the off season you can move on from him if he continues to have horrible incidents like that. But I think you've got to give him a chance and just show somewhat, I guess, some sense of loyalty because I think he did contribute and has contributed a lot to the Golden State Warriors organization, and that is very undervalued in my opinion. But the problem is you just got to keep it basketball. Simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I feel kind of the similar way where it's
Hmm.
just like, I mean, what is the trade? I mean, like,
Yeah.
how many teams? I know that we know he's a talented player. I'm just curious, like, with the baggage, how many teams would actually be, in the position of like, yeah, let's trade for this guy, and he'll, set the culture, for our team or something
Yeah,
like that.
that's
I
why.
don't just yeah, I just don't necessarily know how many teams would be into that because I just feel like Golden State is just going to give this another shot, right? Where it's like,
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, obviously, like they're not going to trade Steph. I don't think they're going to trade Clay, or anybody like that. I mean, Wiggins could be on the table just because, unlike the other guys, he's not part of the same core. I know he helped them win a title. He was their second best player that year, but still doesn't have the same, long standing, relationships that say the other guys have with one another, right? Like, I mean, that's one reason why he was moved to the bench. I mean, like Clay, because again, Clay was pretty bad, but Wiggins was even worse, and he just didn't have the same rapport. So, I mean, I feel like that's probably more likely on the table where one of those other periphery guys get moved. Because I think like again with Kaminga playing pretty well, like you could see like a team be like, oh, Kaminga seems like he's a solid young player, so like we'll
Yeah.
be okay with giving you, whatever, if Kaminga's in the deal. I'm not saying that they have to trade Kaminga. It's just like I don't know. It still doesn't feel quite like it's good enough to where like Draymond coming back makes it better. Because again, even when he was there, outside of the beginning part of the season, they never really looked to me that great. So,
Yeah.
that's where I wonder, again, like I don't think they're gonna trade him. I've heard people kind of, pose these type of questions. So it's just like it's just something I'm thinking about, especially because again, like, we haven't heard a lot from him while he's been out. I mean, I guess we're
That's a
not
good
really
thing.
supposed to. I guess we're not really supposed to, but it's like we're not even hearing like, oh, he's been, he was with the team at practice, for X
Right.
amount of time. Like we're not hearing too much of that. So I'm not saying anything bad's going on. It's just something that's kind of intriguing.
Sure. Yeah,
Um,
agreed.
do you feel like that they've looked better without him, or do you just think like it's just more of a product of like, you know, like they're playing with a little bit more desperation and who they're playing? Like, what do you think?
I mean, it's just more of the same to me. It feels like, it shows you that Draymond necessarily isn't their only problem. I guess that would be the best way to put it. I think, they have more than one problem. Um, they need consistency. They need some guys to step up. And I mean, you can't really ask much more from your younger guys. So I think you just need to be and move more collectively as a unit. I think that's their issue for sure. And it sucks when the off the court stuff does intervene. I think that's what's happening here. Not even really off the court stuff, just the antics are intervening. Everybody's having to do damage control, pressers. It's just enough is enough. So, but regardless, I don't really want to say they've looked better without him. Like I just feel like it's just more of the same because I mean Kaminga's come in and I think he's played very well, but it just hasn't translated to an overwhelming amount of wins. Not enough for me to say, yeah, for sure they don't need Draymond anymore. Like we don't care what happens.
I think they've won 6 of their last 10,
Okay,
if I'm not mistaken.
not horrible.
Um, yeah. So moving on, Nets not trading Mikal Bridges. Woj reports Brooklyn's intent remains to add talent around Mikal Bridges amid 15-19 record. So the Nets have been a team that hasn't really been talked about a whole lot. I think because
Mm-hmm.
there's not really a whole lot going for them to be honest.
Yeah,
They started off the season okay, I guess. Maybe a little better than you would have expected, but as of late, they've not really been very good. I mean, they're 2-8 in their last 10.
jeez, that's bad.
A number, some guys were out, and then also some guys have had poor performances, right? Like I think Cam Thomas has gone like over his last 20 or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah, that was rough. I saw
Yeah,
his quote. That was funny. He's like, you know
yeah,
how I do.
yeah,
That's funny.
exactly. Like I mean, just a lot of weird stuff. I mean, they
Mhm.
have like some interesting players, but it's like it's not enough, to be like a quality team. I don't think so. I just kind
Right.
of wonder, are they? I mean, they don't have a reason to be bad because they don't have their own pick. So they're kind of another one of those teams that's kind of looming where it's like, do they make a trade? I mean, I just don't feel like there's like a trade that puts them in that next tier, of teams. I mean,
Mm-mm.
maybe if they acquire somebody that I'm not expecting, like if they just randomly get Siakam or something like that, okay. But like,
Even then,
yeah,
is that
even
much
then, I
different
don't.
from Toronto?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's where I don't know. So I almost kind of wonder, like, are they somebody where it's like maybe they make like some lateral-ish type moves where it's like, okay, maybe we'll trade, Dorian Finney-Smith, or maybe we'll trade Royce O'Neal, or maybe Spencer Dinwiddie, or
Yeah,
somebody like that. I just kind of wonder because, it's been it's not been that great. And like I think there are some players on the roster, that are solid players that can help a lot of teams. It just doesn't feel like there's enough players to help out this team. Because again, like they're below 500. I mean, I didn't really think they were going to be that great just because again, we know even though they made the playoffs last year, that had more to do with, Durant and Kyrie,
absolutely.
the previous iteration of the Nets kind of banking in enough wins so that way they weren't going to completely fall out. Now this is closer to what the team probably actually is, which is like probably just like a play-in team, at
Yeah.
best.
Yeah, I think it's a solid collection of, the upper tier um role players and impact players, which is not a bad thing for sure. Like I think, you can build a solid team around the guys that you do have here. It's just going to take a little bit of time, but or you could go the route like you said, where you move some of those impact guys who contenders I think would be looking for because I think impact players are always valuable, especially at the trade deadline. So I think you should probably look for them to make moves. I just don't know what they're going to get back in return. That would be the question mark.
Again, like I don't know what their approach is going to be because they could also approach it, in a direction of like, let's be buyers because we don't have our pick, kind of like Houston, where it's like there's no reason for us to be bad.
You're right.
Like, and that's why I said like maybe a lateral move, right?
Right.
Like I don't think they're gonna like just completely sell guys and just all of a sudden be horrible.
Right.
Maybe they will, I don't know, but
Be
also
no
like
point in
I don't.
that though.
But also like my thought process is what's the move that actually makes this team better? You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like I don't know what that is. And like you said, even if they get some solid star player, is that enough to make them like much better than what they are right now? Like I still probably like even if they got like a Siakam or, somebody else that we're not thinking of right now, like a Levine or somebody like that, like I still don't feel like they would be much better, than the other teams, right? Like I would still take, any of the top teams, in the East, right? Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, Miami. I would still take all those teams over Brooklyn. And then, after that, right? Like if New York and Cleveland, I would still probably take them over Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I don't feel like there's like a whole lot of, upward mobility, obviously, for the roster is currently constructed, but I don't know what would also make this team much better. Like, I guess you just need another star. I just don't know how much better it would make them.
Yeah, and it'd have to be a one of those higher tier stars.
Right.
I
It
think
makes
that would
sense.
be an interesting combo.
Right. Like, it makes sense what Woj is saying, like, in terms of, like, yeah, like, there's no reason to trade Mikal Bridges. He's been
Yeah.
playing well. Right? He's your best player, right? So, like, there's no point in moving him. It's just a matter of, like, who can you bring in that's going to make this team better? Like, I
Right.
guess you could say, just bring in any star that can play alongside Bridges and it makes them better. But who is it? Like, I don't know. And I mean, they have some assets because again, they have players that I think teams would want. It's not like just guys that are just on the last year of their deals and they're just not that good. Like they have guys that can help out teams. They have some other teams picks, but again, I don't know. That's kind of the tough part where it's like for some of these teams, I just don't really know. Like it does it. I don't know like what the move is. I think there's a lot that they could do because they
Hmm.
have things to move around. I just don't know if there's an obvious move because for some of these teams, like you just know like the type of guys that make a lot of sense. But for Brooklyn, I just don't know. Like I guess yeah, another star, but what type of star, right? Like is it a guy like a Siakam who's pretty good but still probably shouldn't be your best player? Or is it like another guy that's like, a tier above that? How many of those guys are available right now? I don't know.
Yeah. That's kind of where I stand on it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. And again, like, it also doesn't help, again, say like a Ben Simmons, right? You've gotten nothing out of him,
Yeah,
that hurts. That's a guy where, if he panned out, right, that would make your team probably better, than what it is right now. But,
for sure.
with him, unfortunately being hurt, and even when he's out there, still not being the same guy that he once was, that makes it tougher as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then moving on, just a couple of last things, I guess, to kind of wrap up, the Raptors Knicks stuff, kind of coming full circle.
Hmm.
Siakam, according to Mark Stein, unlikely to sign deal if traded. He would prefer to reach unrestricted agency or unrestricted free agency in 2024. I guess that makes sense, right? Like you don't need to sign an extension; you're going to get more money as an unrestricted free agent.
Yes.
That's not really a surprise. They mentioned teams like Dallas, Sacramento, Indiana, teams we've talked about before, as well as even the Hawks, which we've talked about before, even the Grizzlies as well, which I think is
That
kind
would
of
be
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious how they would be able to do that deal. I guess that would probably be one where like the Grizzlies kind of move some of their other non-Jaren Jackson, Desmond Bain type guys,
Hmm.
right? Like, I mean, who would? I mean, I guess what like a Steven Adams, Brandon Clark, or I don't know,
Yeah.
just random guys. Not that those guys are random guys, but you know what I mean. I don't.
Yeah.
I'm curious how that would go.
It would have to be a pretty big package, I feel like.
Right. And then like that one's weird because it's like Jaren Jackson Jr. still doesn't seem like he's a center.
No, not at
Siakam
all.
4. So
Yep.
like, that's how does that make much sense? I don't know. But
It
I
would be
mean it would be
intriguing
interesting. Yeah, it would
if
be
they were
intriguing.
fully
And then
healthy.
yeah, and then for the Knicks, we didn't this actually happened not long after we finished the previous pod, right? With Miles McBride, and he signed an extension, 3 years, 13 million. I mean, I guess now he's the backup point guard. I mean, I feel like he's kind of a limited player. I know he's a decent defender, but
Hmm.
offensively, not really much of a contributor. And then it's like he's on kind of undersized as well. So I don't know. I feel like that's if you're looking for another upgrade, if you're the Knicks, a better backup point guard, I definitely think is ideal. But again, you have him as a contract. That's another potentially tradable piece
Oh yeah, for
down the
sure.
line. Or if he gets better, because I think he's still kind of young. Um, maybe he improves somewhat, and then you have like a solid backup point guard on a much cheaper contract than with what's Emmanuel Quickly. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
23, so he's
Yeah.
still pretty young. But like I said, he's just I don't know. I mean, I guess he's shooting well from three, right? Like 40%, but it's such a small sample size and such a limited amount of minutes, right?
Sure.
40% from three, but one attempt a game and 5 minutes a game. I mean, like I don't
Yeah.
know. Whereas, like, the previous 2 seasons, 29 from three, 25 from three, right? Like, I don't feel like he's much of an offensive guy. I think his calling card is defense, but,
And
he's
that's the
kind of a
kind of guy
stout,
that they kind of want, though. I don't know, in
right,
terms of like perimeter defense, especially off the
right.
bench coming on the second unit.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see how that pans out. He's going to get more of an opportunity now with Quickly out
Yeah.
because he needs some type of backup point guard. He's just a completely different player, right?
Yeah.
Quickly's more of a scoring guy that at times can defend, whereas like McBride is more of a defensive guy. But like you said,
Absolutely.
in some ways it does fit the identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts. In the comments. Our takes on how the trade's gone so far, right? Darvin Ham, should he be fired? Should he not be? And then like all-star returns. Just let us know because again, if you comment, we will read it. On
Mm-hmm.
the next episode. Obviously we haven't read any. As of late, that means we haven't had any
Yeah.
comments. So hopefully we can get
Keep the
some.
comments coming, man.
Yeah, to read out at the beginning of the episode. Or even on the shorts, that we put out. If there's comments there, we'll try to read those as well. Again, pay attention and look out for the Discord that'll be coming out, at some point. To join the off ball takes community.
Yes.
So that way we can have some discussions. Um, Again, continue to like, comment, and subscribe. We appreciate all the support. It's about to be the 1 year anniversary of our podcast.
Yes, sir.
I mean, we'll see you next week.